There are fears the Middle East could be on the brink of all-out war after Iran launched nearly 200 missiles at Israel overnight.
UK forces played their part in an attempt to prevent further escalation, according to the Defence Secretary John Healey, with RAF fighter jets understood to have been involved. Well, let's speak to the former Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps. You are at the Tory party conference in Birmingham, Grant Shapps. I'm disappointed that there isn't actually a minister in your place, no disrespect to you, to tell our viewers what's going on in the Middle East and what our involvement is. There is a convention, I know, that when the party conferences go on, the government steps out of the way. But in their absence, we're going to ask you, how perilous is this moment and how far should the UK be involved?
It's obviously incredibly serious, and we saw these incoming projectiles, missiles from Iran aimed at Israel overnight, as happened back in April, where I authorised the RAF to shoot down any incoming missiles over Iraq and Syria on their way to Israel. I was very pleased to see, and I would strongly welcome the fact that Sir Keir Starmer has done the same thing overnight and made sure that anything incoming from Iran is shot down by our aircraft that are already in the area. There's an existing operation called Operation Shader, under which they operate. Strongly welcome that. But again, once again, Iran, right at the heart of all of the instability that we see in the Middle East. And I think we are probably approaching a time where we have to recognise that Iran themselves need to be dealt with.
As we said, you were the Defence Secretary a year ago when the October 7th attacks from Hamas into Israel occurred. From that moment, because we've talked about this before on the programme, your task was to try to help stop this escalating into a wider war with Lebanon and with Iran. Are we yet at the point where Israel is at war with Iran? Are these sort of skirmishes? Is this sort of them trying to pressure for positioning in a negotiation, or is this actually a conflict which is now going to deepen? I mean, in short, have you failed, or have we all failed to stop that escalation happening?
But first of all, I don't think we're absolutely there, but we're very, very close to it if this were to continue. Have we failed? Yes, clearly. And the big failure is not to deal with Iran, who are behind all of the instability through Hamas, through Hezbollah, through the Houthis, through the Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq, and, of course, Iran itself now, for the second time this year, firing on Israel. And if we just don't recognise the central role that Iran plays in all of this, that, by the way, the moderate Arab states, places like Saudi, places like the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Egypt, all of whom absolutely hate the way that Iran are behaving in this region. If we don't recognise all of that, plus, I'm afraid, an additional complication of, Russia potentially supplying nuclear secrets to Iran, then we are going to really suffer, not just as that region, but as a world. And so I think this is a wake-up again.
And who do you blame
for the world? Iran at the heart. All roads lead to Tehran. That's what I would say.
Who do you blame for that failure? It's clearly not something in the power of the British Defence Secretary, even the British Prime Minister. But who do you blame in recent years for that view that Iran has been allowed to get away unchecked?
Well, of course, there was that sort of multi-nation deal to prevent Iran from, or try to prevent Iran from developing these technologies. It fell apart under Trump. The world, though, I think, is collectively responsible for perhaps actually getting distracted into blaming lots of others, including Israel, for something which fundamentally Iran is the state that stirs this up. They sponsor, they pay for, they train, they provide the weapons to all of these various different militia groups, most of them terrorist groups, that spend all their time stirring things up in the Middle East. So I think we've been a little bit naive as a world not to have addressed this Iranian issue sooner.
OK, but can you... I wonder...
what we've seen this week, I think, leads back to them.
Can you explain to those viewers who might say at this point, while everybody respects the fact that countries have a right to defend themselves. Obviously, Israel suffered a grievous attack on October the 7th. But if we could achieve a ceasefire in Gaza, which we have not, despite words and pressure and action over arms, if we could achieve a ceasefire in Gaza, that would go some way to cooling down what's going on.
Yeah, no, I agree it would, for which I think probably the remaining hostages would need to be released. You'd need to stop having those rockets fired out of Gaza and then, of course, get to that ceasefire point. And there have been a lot of attempts internationally. I was involved with some of them as well to try to get to a ceasefire. But, you know, all throughout all of this, we've had rockets coming in from Hezbollah who have never adhered to the UN Resolution 1701 to pull back from the border with Israel, so pull back by 15 kilometres further into Lebanon. They've never adhered to that, and they've carried on firing rockets. It doesn't really get much coverage, but, you know, if you are Israel, a country about the size of Wales, I think, and you've got rockets coming to you from the south, so you've got the Houthis firing up, you've got from Gaza, you've got from Lebanon, and you've got from Iran, you are pretty much surrounded by hostility, which prevents any of this from ever coming to a conclusion. Now, I'm not here to apologise for, I mean, I don't really like the Israeli government, I've got to tell you, pretty much in the same way as I don't like the British government. But I still am proud of Britain, and I still think Israel has a right to exist. And people get confused over the fact that this is a democracy, and it isn't comparable to a state like Iran with the Revolutionary Guard and their view that this country, this democracy, doesn't even have the right to exist on this planet.
And just before we turn to domestic affairs and, of course, the leadership of your party, what do you say to those? Because we are getting a lot of comments this morning. It's not our conflict. It's not our issue. Why are we being dragged into it?
Well, I'm afraid instability like this in the world, much as we might say, look, it's not our issue and it shouldn't matter to us. I mean, look what happened in Ukraine. There was an invasion there. We ended up having our energy prices spike through the roof. It cost us over £50 billion of taxpayers' cash to support people's energy bills. And even then, the energy bills went up massively. So conflicts and wars elsewhere, I'm afraid, are not isolated to those areas. We've seen the disruption, what's happened in the Red Sea with the Houthis attacking shipping, and what that's meant to carrying cargo around the world. We are not an isolated island, even though the United Kingdom's an island. So, yeah, of course it matters to us. And any kind of view that you can sort of hunker down and expect it not to affect us is naive.
Let's take you to the Goldfish Bowl. It will probably feel a bit like an isolated island, the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. We've got the 4 leadership candidates on stage this morning. Fair to say in the last couple of days, Kemi Badenoch's been having a tough time. Robert Jenrick having a tough time yesterday. James Cleverly on the up. Looks like he may now be in second place in the betting stakes, might end up in the final 2. We were hoping to hear from Mr Cleverly this morning. Maybe very wisely he's played safe. And instead we've got his campaign chief, Grant Shapps, on the programme. What's going on in this leadership race? And is Mr Cleverly on the up?
Well, I've always thought he'd be in the final, actually. I'm his campaign chair. I've always thought he'd be in the final because, actually, what the Tory party needs to do right now is unite and move forward. And actually, when you're in opposition, of course, gives you a very obvious and common political enemy in the government. And heaven knows they've been given us plenty of space to point out where they may not have been entirely honest and truthful with the electorate in all sorts of different ways before that election, in which they simply said they wanted a change but didn't tell us what it was. So I think Cleverly is the obvious candidate, head and shoulders above, not least because actually he's had the kind of experience that you need, those 3 a.m. calls that you get in posts like Home Secretary or Foreign Secretary, where you actually have to make sometimes quite literally life and death decisions. And James Cleverly has that experience. Actually, I think it's been a good process for the parties. It's quite cathartic, actually, to be able to have these debates and discuss which direction policy should go in. But I think that right now, what we need to do is elect the person who's most likely to cut through with the public. And actually, every single survey and poll shows that's James Cleverly. So I'm not surprised to see him
are you,
coming
Grant?
forward, and looking forward to this morning.
And you're not surprised, are you, having been in the cabinet with her? My guess is you're not surprised that Kemi Badenoch has been fading this week. Was she? Is she being found out?
Well, actually, I like Kemi. Actually, I like all the candidates as it happens. But I do know from experience, and I was just reflecting back on the 1997 Tory leadership election. It was all over by conference, and William Hague had been elected. And he's not the William Hague, the statesman that we all know and love today. It was William Hague who was tripped up the first time he got into a difficult interview after he'd already become leader. And the good thing about having somebody like James Cleverly is he's got all of that experience. And I think the other candidates don't yet have that level of experience and less likely to do well when it comes to the thing which, as a leader of the opposition, you don't actually have any direct power. So the only thing you can do is really present the party to the country and explain why you think the government's not doing the right thing. Have a bit of vision. And I think that's what we're going to see from James this morning.
All right, Grant Shapps, thanks very much indeed, former Defence Secretary.